us wonder if you're one of them girls, 'cause I'm one of them boys who trade his whole world, yeah, for one of them girls who likes to act all quiet, sexy, not even trying. Yeah, you know I ain't lying. Damn right, you're one of them girls, broke every heart in your hometown on the day you rolled out. Got them all wishing on stars now. Have I found one of them girls that ain't trying to meet nobody? You're just here for the party. If I'm wrong, then stop me. You're one of them girls that ain't handing out your number. You like to make us want you. You like to make us wonder if you're one of them girls. Well, I'm one of them boys who trade his whole world, yeah, for one of them girls. You're one of them girls I wanna put my lips on, hold all night long, write a little love song for one of them girls that ain't trying to meet nobody. You're just here for the party. If I'm wrong, then stop me.
Good afternoon, Pig Channel viewers. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on Pig Channel, brought to you by Precision Vet Services here in Alberta. Yeah, we're going to go through a couple of topics on reproduction, some of the best practices, some of the choices that we have, certainly for our client base in Southern Alberta. There have been some changes with the colony world on reproductive options that can be used, but in essence, for all viewers across Canada, there's never a bad time to be reviewing and getting up to speed on just getting sows bred and what the best way to do that is. So I guess for the agenda, I will start off with about a 3-minute intro of some of the on-farm reproduction support that we want to give at Precision Vet Services. And then we will be hearing from Dr. Kurt Precious, and then lastly, Dr. Chris Kuster. I myself am one of the partners in Precision Vet Services, and down in the southern corner of Alberta, working with pigs here, and certainly enjoying the change and yeah, some of the updates to the industry. I'll maybe share my screen at this point and go through my couple of slides. And while I do that, I'll just mention that Merck Animal Health is the sponsor of this webinar, and so we thank them for their support. And here I'll just get and then for any questions that anybody would have, I would direct you to the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. Just type in your questions there in that box, and we will, for sure at the end of the webinar, go through those questions and answer any of them. And then we may have time for some questions after Kurt's presentation. So if you can see my screen here now, yeah, at Precision Vet Services, we see, especially with some of the changes to Southern Alberta in terms of reproduction on farm, we just want to make sure that we are there to support our guys in any way that we can. Basically, yeah, we talked about some of the changes for producers, some moving to AI from natural service, but also for many producers that are already doing AI, there's the consideration of using regular AI versus PC AI. And Kurt will go into that. So we just want to support our clients on natural service mating and what that entails, AI, and even breeding soundness evaluations. And we'll get into it with having Lonica, our vet tech, on farm for postmortems and other sampling. Lonica is our vet technician at Precision, and she's experienced in swine and well capable for sampling. So it's helpful for cases where we can have her go on farm and sample, whether that's postmortems or blood samples, or as we'll get into, semen testing. The benefit is obviously that that's a lower cost than having the vet out to do it, and in some cases can even be more timely. The live boar repro support that we want to do is for semen collection on farm, strictly for lab testing, for those that are natural service. Doing either we can do a breeding herd evaluation of the boars that are on the farm, or the replacement boars as they come in, to make sure that they will perform once they're in the farm. So that's that. And then obviously insemination support for those moving to AI or PCAI. We want to offer as much support as we can in doing kind of helping with the procedures, monitoring the semen storage, handling biosecurity, and breeding audits between heat detection, breeding protocols, and gilt or sow management. And that's all I really have. Just a brief little update there on what we're doing at Precision, and I'll maybe hand it over to Kurt now for his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Cordell. So I will talk to you about regular AI, standard AI, artificial insemination versus post-cervical artificial insemination, and is it worth the risk, or is it worth making the switch? And so my outline today is kind of comparing the two different techniques of artificial insemination, some trial data that we have, some costs, sort of a brief cost comparison. And really my main focus is to kind of look at the pros and cons of the two different options, and then provide a summary of kind of what that's going to look like. So first of all, there's kind of two main kind of different style of catheters and different types of techniques. I know many of you have been doing AI for many, many years, but this is kind of new to the game. And so on the left here is the kind of the classic regular catheter with a kind of a foam tip, which we've come a long ways from the old corkscrew kind of firm rubber catheters. These ones are much more forgiving and kind of a one size fits all for gilts and sows. And so that's kind of a foam tip, and then the semen tube would come in here, and then you can close that cap to kind of keep the semen locked into the sow for several minutes after AI. And then on this side would be kind of one brand of the post-cervical AI catheter. This one's the Megapore brand, and you'll see why I'm talking about this one later on. But this one, you kind of have the similar type of part as the regular AI that goes locks into the cervix, but then it has this extension that would go through the cervix into the uterine body, actually. And then the semen would be deposited inside the uterus, much closer to the ovaries. So those are kind of the two. There's different brands of all these, of course. So just to kind of, for those of you who've never kind of done any AI, or even just to compare the two. So the normal catheter, regular AI, would come in obviously through the vulva into the vagina, and then over here you can see the kind of the blue, that's that kind of that foam tip on that catheter, and that's cervix. So it locks into the cervix. That's where the boar's penis would also be locking into when they would be doing natural service, but we kind of have this foam tip, and that's where it locks. And so that's where if you're doing standard AI, that's where the semen would be deposited. With the post-cervical, you see this little extension here. Now that's going all the way into the uterine body and depositing the semen there. Here you can see kind of from two different brands of PCAI catheters what it looks like. So again, here's the catheter coming in through the vagina, here's the cervix, and then here's that rest of that catheter going to the uterine body. And you can see the dye, when they deposit that semen there, it actually goes all the way in through the rest of the uterine body, all the way up to the ovary. And here's another one. It didn't go quite as far up, but it's still well into the uterine body and is much easier drawn up to the ovary by the sow, by that natural kind of smooth muscle contractions. So instead of being deposited right here, where it has to travel all the way up here, the advantage is it's right inside the uterine body and can kind of just travel much slower distance. And so it kind of, you can, as a result, there's potential for lower volume and lower concentration of sperm because they're actually that much closer to where they need to be. Here's a video of a post PCAI. So here's just doing some cleaning of the vulva, which becomes pretty important for PCAI, but I'll skip a bunch of that. Oops, sorry. Wrong button. So now you can see he's already cleaned the vulva, make sure that's clean. Now he's inserting the catheter. So it's the same as normal AI. Open the catheter, really work hard not to touch any external vulva with the catheter. You angle upwards to avoid the bladder, and then you kind of push it until it locks in. The sow will lock in that catheter, and if you pull back just gently on it, she'll pull it back in. Now he leaves the sleeve on. Now he's slowly moving in the inner part of the PCI catheter. So now he's going through the cervix right now and actually inserting the catheter all the way into the uterine body. One advantage of PCAI is he attaches the semen like normal, the tube, but instead of having to wait for the sow to draw up the tube, you can actually just fully squeeze that in there. It's kind of the opposite of what we've always been trained for regular AI. Now, because the boar is gone now, he just can squeeze in that semen tube, or the whole tube of semen. He's done that, pulling out the catheter, and it's done. So it's separating the two events. The heat checking, you make sure someone has to do a great job of heat checking, and they identify sows in heat, and then you remove the boars actually, and 20 minutes to 30 minutes later, you come back, and then someone just can go boom, 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 and inseminate all the sows. So it allows you to have your best people that are awesome at heat checking actually do the heat checking, and then maybe another person or the same person could actually do the insemination. So you can heat check all your sows, go for coffee, come back and breed all your sows, and it can be a really efficient process. Some of the trial data that we've done sort of within our group, and you may have seen this before, but this is kind of from a few years ago actually, from just comparing regular AI versus a PCAI rod. And so there was about 450 sows or so on each group. So the conception rate was similar, no significant difference. The farrowing rate again was similar, no significant difference. Total born was better on the PCAI side. Not fully significant, but it could just be the fact that we don't have enough numbers to show that. But the born alive, there was almost over half a pig difference, 0.6, I guess, of a pig difference, and that's highly significant. So the PCAI resulted in more born alive in this trial. And so at that point, High Life chose to go to a PCAI, which was several years ago now, and has been doing that sort of routinely since then. But not all rods are the same. Just like everything else, there are differences between different brands and all that good stuff. So we can see here the three different brands. So BioFlow, Buckingham versus Megapore. Those are three different brands that are on the market today, and there's I'm sure more than that as well. But you can see the repeat percentage is there's kind of a step up for each one. Again, farrowing rate similar. There's slight step up on each one, and then the total born was definitely significant, also significant between each one. So from our research, the Megapore seems to be the most the highest performing rod at this time. Again, we're constantly looking to see if there's the next best one, so we're doing more research on that as well. But that'd be the one that we have available. Cost comparison, so just shifting gears a little bit, I guess. So the catheters are slightly different. There is a cost difference, and I just use rough numbers here, so don't take these exactly for what they are, but they're approximate numbers. But the regular AI catheter is approximately 20 cents a catheter versus the PCAI catheter is about 60 cents a catheter. A tube of semen is approximately $8. Again, that depends on which stud, and there's lots of different differences for genetics, etc. But it's $8, approximately $8 a tube. Right now, there's no real difference with the PCAI dose. So it's still at $8 a tube. I would argue that there could be some opportunity to have a lower cost per tube, even $7.50 or something in that range, since we are able to get a lower volume of semen and a lower concentration. So you can need less bores, which can be one of the advantages, I guess, for if you have your own bores. If you own your own bores, this will be a way to, don't need as many. For the other consumables like lube, etc., breeding buddies or breeding bags, all that kind of stuff, it's really the same. Total cost, so if you put these together, that's about $8.20 per insemination. And for PCI, it's kind of that 40 cents more. But if we reduce the kind of the cost of the semen to kind of compensate for the lower volume and concentration, then we could actually be even cheaper for the PCI dose. With that said, really the high indexing bores are the ones that you can really take advantage of with PCI, because you have the same bores go that much further. And so if we focus on just making sure that when you use the semen of the top 25% indexing bores versus just your average AI bore in the stud, it actually works out to probably almost $12 of added value per semen dose. Or if we assume 2 doses per mating, then that's about $2 per weaned pig. So there's definitely value to use those top 25% of the bores, and the PCI allows you to go further with that. But that's, of course, needs to make sure that you actually are receiving that high quality semen, and it's not just receiving an average AI bore semen. So that's kind of a little bit of a cost comparison. Some of the pros and cons. The cons are on kind of the next page. So just this is kind of the pros at this point. So for regular AI, standard AI, the catheters are a little bit lower cost. You can use regular AI for both gilts and sows. It's the same technique. Typically, the staff on farms today are knowledgeable. They don't need to learn a new skill, so that can be valuable for on farm. And really, the Canadian boar stud industry today is built around sort of that 70, 75 mil dose semen and regular AI. So it would be a change there. So it's an advantage that it's kind of ready to go for you. The PCAI, this is a newer technology, I guess, but it's been around for many years already. So it's well proven, I would say. But ultimately, the location where the semen is being deposited, being in the uterus and closer to the ovaries, is an advantage. And there's less risk of backflow and loss of that kind of sperm and semen out the back. It's faster because you don't have to wait for the sow to draw in that semen. You can actually, like I said, once you heat detect it, you come back later and you can physically squeeze the semen in. You can separate those two events. So I guess depending on your setup, that may be an advantage or disadvantage. I would argue it's an advantage because now you can have the best staff doing what they do best. If someone's job is, if they're awesome at doing heat detection, well, they can do that only. And if somebody else is really great at the breeding technique, well, they can do that. You can separate those tasks out. From our research, there is a higher total born alive. I would say for sure it's the same, but it can definitely be higher. Of course, this is all dependent on management and yeah, that's critical no matter what. I would say on some, it seems like some farms you get increased farrowing rate, and others maybe it's the same, but basically I would say you could probably count more on consistent farrowing rate. You don't have maybe quite as many ups and downs. And then where I see the real value is you can optimize the use of boars with the highest genetic value and highest quality semen. So if you know you have the best quality boars, you can use that semen and use those boars to go further than just your regular sow or the regular boars. And in theory, we can reduce the cost of semen because it's a lower dose and a lower concentration and volume. Some of the cons, I would say, so for regular AI, there is more risk of backflow. Because if again, that can be overcome with proper technique where you actually make sure it's locked in place, but there is still more risk because it is only in the cervix and not in the uterine body. The staff are doing heat detection and insemination at the same time, so they need to be good at both, kind of like I alluded to earlier. Those would be the major cons for the regular AI. Post-cervical AI, there is a slightly higher cost of the catheters, but realistically, if you get improved performance, that'll easily pay for that, but that is a higher cost. At this point, we are still doing regular AI for gilts. I think some people in the industry would suggest that they're getting closer to be able to do PCAI in gilts, but it seems like because their cervix has never really been fully opened with piglets coming through the birth canal, it's a little bit more challenging to do PCAI in gilts. So we've typically stayed with regular AI in gilts. So now you need kind of two techniques, which is a little bit of an added challenge. And I would say the industry has not consistently made the change to a lower volume, lower cost semen dose. That is still, like I said, it's built for the regular AI at this point. But I think there's opportunity there. And I would say breeding technique becomes important, and it's kind of a new skill that they'd have to learn to do this PCAI. And the hygiene, because we are going all the way into the uterus, where normally the cervix and vagina have natural barriers in place to prevent infections, we do need to make sure we're not introducing something during that technique. So that becomes critical. So kind of in summary, in my mind, the PCAI has the potential to kind of increase your total born alive and potentially have some benefits for a more consistent conception and farrowing rate. So there's potentially some definitely value there. The PCAI insemination is faster, and that can be really valuable if you have limited trained staff on farm. The regular AI still has lower cost of consumables, and likely you do not need to train a new technique to your staff. With that said, I would argue there's still opportunity to, even with regular AI, to review that with your staff and to kind of maximize your value from that. And I've kind of asked the question to the industry, I guess, is our industry to me has an opportunity to optimize the use of boars with the highest genetic value and the best semen quality with the use of PCAI. Because it's approximately 25 to 30% lower dose, we can use those best boars for that many more sows, and we can get them to go that much further from a growth performance and even fertility standpoint. Because we know there are some boars that over hundreds of doses will have 100% conception versus others will only be 75 or 85. And so if we can use those best boars more, there's a lot of value for you guys. And so, yeah, that's kind of my main thing. Talk to your vet team to learn more. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Cordell.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kurt, for that overview on the ins and outs of PCAI versus regular AI. We do have one question in the question box, but perhaps we'll leave that until the end, and we'll just dive right in now to Chris Kuster's presentation. Before we go there, I'll just remind you again, any questions that you would have, let's just add them to the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen, and yeah, we'll get going with Dr. Kuster. So Dr. Kuster is basically a swine andrologist, meaning that his specialty is actually working with boar semen and boar studs. We have the privilege of working with Dr. Kuster through the Demeter Andrology Lab. and I'll just give you a bit of a bio for him. So he earned his degrees from University of Illinois. He did some animal science before getting into vet school, and graduated in 1998. He went and got a master's in swine medicine and theriogenology, which is kind of reproduction, while completing kind of an additional executive vet program. And then finally a PhD actually in vet medical science. Since then, in 2003, Dr. Kuster has been private consulting, focusing on boar studs and associated reproductive technologies for sow farms, offering third-party evaluations through the Kuster Research and Consulting Andrology Lab, pioneering independent cytogenetic services for U.S. and Canadian producers, kind of detecting litter size, reducing chromosomal abnormalities in boars, and participating in private and public research projects. So Dr. Kuster is more than qualified, and we certainly look forward to hearing from him. Dr. Kuster?
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Young. Okay, so I'll be talking about the three options that we'll have listed here are purchasing semen versus operating an on-farm boar stud or doing on-farm collection, and then natural mating, which I understand many of you are already familiar with. So as Dr. Young said, I operate the lab here in Illinois, Kuster Research and Consulting. Also do boar stud consulting, and also have involved with the lab there in Canada at Demeter, helping to oversee the quality and the support for what comes out of there. So by way of introduction, I just wanted to let you know the roadmap for what we'll be covering today. So the three things that I said there in the title, we'll be looking at those from the perspective of advantages and disadvantages of each and how they compare. And then we'll close with some important differences between sow farms, which could contribute to your decision on which to use, which is best for you. And these are the areas that we'll be mainly discussing. So we're going to go through genetic merit first, or progeny performance, and the effect that the boars have on that. Also the health and biosecurity, very important point to consider. Then we will cover semen quality, and we'll close with economics, looking at some cost-benefit ratio and the value proposition for these the three different types of ways to get the sows bred. And then once again, covering the distinctions between sow farms. So I'll start off here right away with the genetic merit. And we're going to be talking about all these slides in these areas will be formatted the same. So we're going to cover purchase semen first, and then on-farm collection, and then natural service. So in the genetic merit, we're really talking about progeny performance here. So the effect that the sire boar has on the performance of the pigs that are born from that mating. So advantages of using purchase semen is that typically the replacement rates are high for AI boars going into boar studs. So you're always having access, or should be having access, to the most up-to-date genetics. You also have quick access to multiple genetic options. You could switch boar lines within a boar stud, or access different genetics altogether if you wish to, if you're purchasing semen. Also, there's the lowest boar to sow ratio, typically with a dedicated boar stud. So meaning that they're the fewest boars serving the most sows. So the highest value boars being spread across the most sows. Disadvantage that I would put in this category of purchase semen when it relates to the genetic merit is oftentimes the customer control of that genetic merit may vary depending on the boar stud or the genetic partner that you're working with. When we look at the on-farm boar collection, from the genetic merit standpoint, the advantages there are that you would control, the sow farm controls the genetics of the boars used. So you get to choose what you're getting and how you use them on your farm. It's not like you're accessing a subpopulation of boars from a larger boar stud and they're making the decision for you on what they send. There's also the potential for a lower boar to sow ratio. Certainly it would be lower than it would be with natural service, but because you typically be talking about a relatively small number of boars on a sow farm compared to what would be in a dedicated boar stud, typically you need to carry a higher inventory. So keep that ratio a little bit higher because of issues that may come along. Certain boars can't be used or sudden death, and looking at what your contingency would be if you're going to carry a larger boar inventory or if you're going to have a boar stud that would supply you if necessary. Some disadvantages when it comes to genetic merit for on-farm boar collection. Because there are fewer boars, smaller numbers of boars on the sow farm, that often results in a longer genetic lag than what you might experience accessing semen from a boar stud. It's just more difficult to manage those smaller numbers. You may have less frequent deliveries or certainly smaller numbers of boars delivered. If there's index values change after the boars are delivered, you're probably going to still use that boar until the next delivery. There's also usually a longer turnaround time to make improvements in index. So if there's been an adjustment to the way that the indexes are calculated, or if you make a decision for your sow farm that you want something changed there, of course you have to change over boars in order to get that done. Whereas at a boar stud, you could just change your order. And also, if you wanted to change genetic lines altogether, if you wanted to go to a different genetic line, obviously that entails a whole series of events, from vetting out the supplier to having the scheduling the boars and getting those delivered and growing them up and getting them trained and all of those things versus immediate access at an external stud. For genetic merit from the natural service standpoint, I really couldn't think of any advantages. I mean, one of the main drivers in going to artificial insemination was so that we could get higher genetic merit spread across more sows from fewer boars. And so really the natural service end of things is not very positive from a genetic merit standpoint. The disadvantages there are that there's the reason for that is there's a lower genetic selection intensity on the natural service boars. You simply need more of them to cover the same number of sows, so they just can't be from that part of the boar performance distribution where the higher indexing boars are. Those go for AI use. So you have a higher boar to sow ratio, and then an even slower turnaround time to improve index or change genetic lines, because you're just talking about more boars to have to deal with there. Switching gears here, we'll talk next about health and biosecurity. And so in this scenario here, we'll talk about purchase semen first, and the advantages there from a health standpoint is that dedicated boar studs tend to be small herds compared to a sow farm anyway. So there's fewer animals to worry about, either both from a management standpoint and also from a receptor standpoint from becoming infected with a new pathogen. And they would have no contact with other pigs. It's not like they're housed on a sow farm. The boar stud would be an island all by itself. There's usually very intensive entry testing for new boars to come into a boar stud, and then ongoing monitoring after they're there. So the health testing and monitoring is typically quite intense at boar studs, being the top of the genetic pyramid, and the fact that small numbers of boars touch a lot of sows. This is taken very seriously at most boar studs. You also have the potential for geographic isolation. Oftentimes boar studs are built in areas where there just aren't other pigs around for larger distances. And also, since there tend to be smaller farms compared to sow farms anyway, higher level risk mitigations can be employed more financially feasible to do things like air filtration, for instance. It also, using externally purchased semen, allows you to go to a closed herd status if you wish, to improve the health or protect the health of your own herd. So you could do internal gilt production by using semen entry instead of bringing in live gilts. The disadvantages here on the health side is that you have a high frequency entry of a biological material, the semen dose, from another site onto your farm. So that part certainly exists. From an on-farm boar collection standpoint, you certainly would have fewer boars than when you compare to natural service. So there's fewer of them to worry about from a health standpoint as far as what they may bring in. They're also totally under your control. So it's not like somebody else is managing the boars. Whatever happens from a health standpoint is under your control. And if there's a health concern at a boar stud, that doesn't affect you. It doesn't interrupt your semen supply or cause a change in sourcing because the boars are already on your farm. Disadvantages would be that typically sow farms would limit themselves to a single boar source, at least in the medium term. Usually you're not sourcing boars from multiple places or changing sources frequently, just from a consistency and health standpoint. So if you wanted to make a genetic change, that's then you have a whole other set of health decisions to make. When you do on-farm boar collection, you do have live animal entry to the sow farm, certainly less than you would with natural service, but you would have the live animals, the boars coming as opposed to the doses. And then you have the boars being exposed to your sows. So they could bring something in, or the boars could pick up something from the sow herd. And if the boars get sick, typically that can lead to reduced semen quality or lower dose production for a period of time. For natural service, once again, the boars are under your control. So the same health status as your sow herd. They're not under somebody else's health management system. The disadvantages are you have many more live animals entering the farm, so the risk of those boars coming on, more of them, more transport, exposure to the sow herd, so same things we talked about on the internal collection. And you also have the added potential for urogenital spread of pathogens because you have the boars in direct contact with the sows during the breeding process. From a semen quality standpoint, on purchased semen, the advantages are that the dedicated boar stud single focus is on semen production. That is their core competency, and so they have the potential to get very good at that. Whereas when you have the boars on the sow farm, usually people's attention is spread in many different places, not necessarily specifically on the boars or on the semen quality. Because there are a large number of boars concentrated in one location, for an offsite dedicated boar stud, it justifies the cost of higher level technology for the evaluation and processing of that semen, and also specialized personnel training in order to do that well. So there's an opportunity for intensive internal quality control, as well as a well-designed external quality assurance program. That I say there's an opportunity there because the dedicated studs certainly can do that, but you would need to find out if any you're looking at are actually doing it, and make sure that's qualified by someone who understands what they should be looking for. Disadvantages would be that the actual quality delivered to your farm from purchased semen may be beyond your control, as opposed to the on-farm boars. So if you have an on-farm collection, you have frequent opportunity to intervene compared to natural service, because now you can see the semen after the boar is collected and before you choose to put it in the sow or not, depending on the quality. You're fully in control of your quality control decisions, and also on the storage time, the amount of time that you keep those doses before you breed the sows. So you could do a lot of fresh inseminations if you have the boars on farm, as opposed to potentially more time passing if you're getting doses delivered from another stud. You have options for internal quality control and external quality assurance when you have an on-farm stud that you wouldn't necessarily have if you're using natural service, for instance. And the boars are only used on your farm. So if you do any additional testing on them, the health testing, what Dr. Young mentioned earlier on the detection of defects and translocations that can reduce litter size, any of the quality assurance work that you do, 100% of that value stays with you because your boar is used only on your farm. And you also have a semen source constantly present, so there's no delays due to blizzards or other unforeseen events. Disadvantages would be with on-farm boars, you have a smaller number of boars. So if there's an issue with a few boars, those can become magnified quickly across your farm. So you need to be watchful for that. Often there's less personnel training associated with on-farm collection and more basic equipment. And the equipment used is more basic compared to what would typically be on a dedicated boar stud. And the processing area I see is often less hygienic. Obviously, at a dedicated boar stud, they have a dedicated lab that can be designed for semen processing and hygiene, whereas on the sow farm, you're usually trying to remodel or find a space to do that maybe wasn't initially intended for it. For natural service, the advantage there, the boars are under your control, so you can do something with them as opposed to boars that are outside of your farm. So you can request an individual breeding soundness exam. Dr. Young mentioned that earlier. You could have reciprocal translocations checked. So these are things that you would just ask your veterinary service provider, make sure they're specially trained to offer these services if that's your interest for natural service boars. The difference or the disadvantages here for natural service would be that you have a high boar to sow ratio, so a lot of boars relative to the number of sows. So typically there's less information on any given individual boar, and it's more costly to gain that information compared to the number of sows you're using them on. There's less frequent opportunities to evaluate because, of course, you're not collecting the boars weekly and have the opportunity to look at the semen. So you may look when they first come in and may look at boars that are having a problem, but it's harder to, less frequent opportunities to see compared to collection. And then there's a lag time when there are problems. I would caution that conception rate does not always equate to litter size. So just because a boar settles sows doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the optimal litter size. Those can be separate questions. In a natural service, you have fewer matings per boar, so the statistical confidence is lower in the performance of any given boar typically than what it could be with an on-farm collection when you have more matings per boar. Moving on to the economics, this point was already introduced by Dr. Kurt on the value of boar index, boar breeding value. And so the question I would raise here is what's the value of an index point? And depending on the genetic supplier you ask, they may use slightly different terms, maybe genetic index, maybe TSI or CVV or EPD. All of these boil down to some way to measure the expected progeny value for that boar. And so there have been estimates, different companies estimate this different ways. To use a round number that's out there would be 10 cents per index point. Depending on how the index is calculated, that may be higher or lower for any given supplier, genetic supplier. And it could differ whether you're talking about sires or boars only, or whether you're talking full program, meaning the sows and the boars from an individual supplier. So in this example, a mature natural, if you're talking about comparing current natural service with an older natural service boar to replacing that boar with an AI quality boar that's younger and has a higher index, you could easily be talking about a natural service boar with an index of 85, which 100 is kind of the middle of the road that we'd be talking about, that the boars would be looking to see if they're better or worse than that. So an older natural service boar could easily be under 100, say 85, whereas a newly placed young AI boar might have an index value of 120. So if you subtract those two, you get a difference of 35 index points at 10 cents a point value. You could be talking as much as $3.50 per pig weaned. So that's quite a bit of difference in value there when you make the jump between natural service and AI. And then if you go to PCAI, which Dr. Kurt also mentioned, we'll talk about here in a moment, you can even access higher index values. So looking at the economics on purchased semen, the advantages would be constant access to the highest indexing value boars. You just saw why that's important. Also, you can repurpose space on the farm if there have been natural service boars there before. All the available space can be used to house productive sows minus your heat check boars. Or you could improve your gilt breeding management by using that space for gilts. When you're purchasing semen, you don't need to dedicate any space to semen collection area or laboratory for processing. No equipment to buy to process the semen. The focus on the sow farm can remain on the core competency of breeding and managing and farrowing sows and pig care. So heat detection and AI rather than boar collection. And you can compare between boar studs to determine what's right for you in terms of delivery and cost, and the cost of the doses themselves, the genetic value that they can offer. And you only pay for what you order or what you use, as opposed to if you have an on-farm stud and you need to carry extra boars for contingency, you're feeding those and caring for them all the time. Disadvantages here, of course, you would have an ongoing expense to an external supplier to supply these doses from a dedicated boar stud. For on-farm boar collection, you'd have a lower boar to sow ratio compared to natural service, which means the index values would go up, as I demonstrated earlier. You would have a better use of space than with natural service boars, and you can control your own cost of semen production, and you can retain all the value from any testing you do of those boars or quality control that you do on the semen during processing or external quality assurance. Disadvantages here would be you'd likely have some remodel costs involved to create appropriate spaces to house and collect the boars, and also to process the semen. That would use up potential sow spaces or gilt management spaces. And of course, these boars would be eating feed. And so that's an ongoing cost. You'd have a cost to purchase the equipment required for collection and processing, and then the consumables or supplies to make the doses, and then have some investment in training of the staff to be able to do that efficiently and well. And then you also have the non-productive time of the boars when they come in. So I just wanted to point this out, is that just because a boar gets delivered to the farm doesn't mean that it can just be trained that week and used for semen collection the next and replace the number of doses that you may have been getting from a mature boar that was there before. Oftentimes these boars are delivered young, and so they may have the libido to mate with a sow or to jump a dummy, but they're not physiologically mature yet, and so you need to wait for that. So there's usually a lag time between delivery and use while they mature, and so they're taking up space and eating feed while you're not using them much. From the economic side on natural service, there may be a lower genetic cost. Certainly the boars themselves would cost less because they have lower genetic index. But I put a question mark there because the question is that really, you would need to check whether that really works on your farm or not, whether it is a lower cost, because of course you have more boars that you need to buy. And so less cost per boar, but more boars compared to what you would get for fewer boars for doing on-farm AI, especially if you were doing PCAI. There's no collection or processing equipment or space needed for natural service, of course. There's no dose delivery cost, and there's no potential for supply disruptions because the boars are right there. Disadvantages related to some things we've talked about previously: the higher boar to sow ratio. So you typically have lower genetic value. You have a lot of potential sow spaces used by boars. You have a lot more feed consumption by these natural service boars, and you have the time compared to AI or PCAI, as Dr. Kurt mentioned earlier, is the time involved in doing it in managing natural service boars. I did want to spend a moment to point out that everybody that, all of you that actually operate sow farms, manage, own them, work in them, you think about what happens on your farm, but there are differences between farms. And so AI may not be the right option for you, or may not be an option. And if AI is an option, maybe on-farm boar collection isn't the right fit for you. Maybe it needs to be doses that are brought in from outside. Also, labor is a consideration, whether or not you have access to the available staffing to do on-farm boar collection, and whether or not there's interest in learning how to do the inseminations if you're going to switch from natural service to AI. And also, if you're looking at on-farm boar collection, whether there's sufficient motivation to do that well, because there's certainly things that need to be trained and learned. It's not automatic. Facilities differ between sow farms. So if there's a switch between natural service and AI, you can convert boar housing to hold more productive sows or gilts, as we said. You would need to decide whether or not you have appropriate space for on-farm boar collection and processing. Can that be created in your existing facility? Location is a question. So depending on your geographic biosecurity, that may inform your decision on whether or not you want to bring in natural service boars or semen doses. And it may also, your access to dedicated boar studs may also depend on your geographic location, what the delivery schedule and distance looks like. And certainly the health, you can talk to your veterinary team about bringing live boars in and conducting boar acclimation versus just bringing in semen doses. Also, one very important thing here to consider is boar dose demand. So whether the farm is on a weekly farrowing schedule or a batch farrowing schedule, or wishes to switch to a batch schedule, has definite implications here. So artificial insemination makes batch systems possible, where you can breed more sows at once and get larger groups of pigs. From a marketing standpoint, that's much easier to implement with AI than it is with natural service, due to the overwhelming number of boars you need to do that in a batch system with natural service. And batching does require surge capacity. So in boar inventory, whether it's natural service or whether you're talking about on-farm collection, you would need a different number of boars if you're going to breed weekly versus on a batch system. Of course, that wouldn't matter to the customer, to the sow farm, so much if you're ordering doses from the outside, although it does have implications for the host boar stud. And then output here, talking about the value proposition for the index values of the boars. So the question is, for your sow farm, whether or not you maintain ownership of those pigs that you wean all the way through finishing, in which case the index value of the boar is very important to you. From a feed efficiency and growth standpoint and carcass characteristics for your buyer, or whether or not you're breed to wean. If you're on breed to wean, then the added value of those index points moves on to who's ever going to feed those pigs. And so you have to decide how that relationship would work. And then the question of whether or not you want or need maternal line boars. If you're going to do internal gilt production, or if you're going to get your gilt supplies from outside, bring in live gilts versus doing your own internal gilt multiplication and closing the herd. And there can be a combination there too. So if you decide to do your terminal services with boars collected on site, you could still outsource the maternal semen if you wanted to do some gilt production internally. Just taking a quick look here at the number of boars required to do standard AI versus post-cervical. This is a calculator. The vets have access to this, but just showing some screenshots for a farm size of 2,500. And if you don't have a 2,500, you can multiply or divide here to get the numbers to fit your situation. But just for instance, 2,500 head sow farm doing standard AI would probably need at least 12 working boars at any given time. So you'd want more than that to cover for those that attrition before you get more boars delivered. Whereas with PCAI, you can cut that number way down. So that same 2,500 head sow farm, may only need access to 5 working boars at any given time. This is a little bit of a busy slide here, but the point I wanted to make here is just to look at the blue line here, the number of boars over time from 2002 to 2017, and estimated in the European Union, and then the number of sows per boar. So you can see that over time, the number of boars dropped and the number of sows per boar went up dramatically. Same situation in Spain with an even larger difference there. And this just represents technology transitions from natural service and initial introduction of standard AI to PCAI or lower concentration doses, depending on the region you're considering. So just an idea of what could happen going from natural service to AI. Take-home points I'd like to stress is that switching from natural service to artificial insemination is really an easy decision if that's something that you're able to do. Deciding between on-farm collection versus purchasing semen, that's a harder choice, and that really is based on your own unique situation. I would encourage you to not remain blind, meaning not being able to see the semen that goes into the sows in a natural service. If you change from natural service to AI, you could be talking about a 15 to 60-fold dilution in the semen going into the sow. So whereas one boar would put an entire collection into a sow, if that gets done at a boar stud or on farm, that's going to be highly diluted. So you want to know what's in there. And even if you're doing natural service, we talked about implementation of boar breeding soundness exams, so you know something about that boar and his semen quality and production before you allow his use on your farm. For on-farm collection, you're going to need training. You're going to need to know what to do for internal quality control, and also some guidance on external quality assurance to check what you're doing. And that requires competent, independent guidance. So somebody, like on your vet team, to ask about that, as opposed to relying wholly on a provider, a genetic provider, or a product provider that maybe has a conflict of interest. If you purchase doses from outside, I would give you the advice of one of our past presidents down here is to trust but verify. So you need to know something about their quality assurance program. Don't just assume because they're a dedicated boar stud that they always do it right. I'd like to thank Dr. Kurt and Dr. Cordell, Precision Vets, for inviting me to give this talk today. And with that, I would be open to questions.
Very good. Well, thank you kindly, Dr. Kuster, for a detailed overview of each of those different options. That was wonderful. I'm sure that we all, including myself, learned things and how to look at maybe the decision for switching basically from wherever you're at now to what you want to achieve. So we will dive into questions. We do have a couple in the question and answer box. There was one from Kurt's presentation. Would you use 1 or 2 tubes in regular AI? Do you want to comment on that, Kurt?
Yes. So that's a great question, a complicated one. I guess it's not as simple as just answering that. So I wanted to answer that one live for you guys. But as you know, the timing of insemination or mating, for that matter, is all about the length or when the sow ovulates. And when the sow ovulates is related to how long she's in standing estrus. It's kind of 2/3 of the way through standing estrus. So it's all about getting that timing right so that the sperm is there, ready to go when she ovulates and can inseminate the eggs, or fertilize the eggs. So with that said, I have several farms that are doing 1 insemination, but I would say from the research we've done in our group over and over again, I would say often even 3 tubes will improve performance if she's still standing after a 3rd day. So yeah, I think with the PCAI, honestly, it gives an opportunity potentially to focus that dose. And even there's fixed time AI with different hormones that we can use as well. But it's a little bit more of a complicated answer, I guess, to that one. And it's probably worth talking to your own vet team to kind of see how that works for your farm.
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, no, that's good. We've got one or two others, I guess. This one's for Dr. Kuster. Would you be able to just explain in a couple words the breeding soundness evaluation and some of the other testing that's involved with the natural service boars?
Yes. So if I can get my microphone back on. Okay. So yeah, the BSE stands for breeding soundness exam or breeding soundness evaluation. And so basically what that involves is a physical exam of the boar to determine his ability to naturally mate, and then to get a sample of his semen, which would get sent off to the dedicated lab, in this case at Demeter, for a full evaluation to look at motility, morphology, concentration. And a big part of that is looking at the quality of those sperm cells to make sure that the boar is ready to breed sows. As I mentioned earlier, one of the dilemmas is the boars often have the physical drive and the ability to mate or to jump on a collection dummy and be collected, but their sperm may not be of sufficient quality to be used for either natural service or AI yet at that time. And then, of course, older boars can have problems too that need to be looked at. And the other testing there, I guess, that could involve diagnostic or health testing, of course, for boars coming in, or also for looking for subfertility issues, whether that's chromosomal abnormalities or chromatin structure issues, but different things there related to the fertility of the boar.
Mm-hmm. And in the past, I've enjoyed your analogy, Dr. Kuster, of just getting the sow pregnant is the ticket into the movie theater. But if you want to watch the show, you need to have a good litter as well, and that, yeah, that's what that encompasses. This is for you as well. Would you just be able to explain the difference between internal on-farm quality control and external quality assurance?
Yes. So the distinction there, the on-farm quality control are steps that can be taken at the site of semen production that are typically occurring real time, either just before production, during production, or soon after on a high proportion of the product. These could be things like checking water quality, checking the extenders mixed properly, checking that the sperm cells are exhibiting normal motility after extension, that they continue to during storage, and that can be checked on all batches. Those would all be examples of things that can happen on the farm, either in a boar stud or on-farm semen collection operation. The external quality assurance involves doses going out to a qualified lab for analysis so that you can see if what you think you're doing on the farm or at the boar stud is really what is in the dose. So at the professional labs, and we can look at all the main parameters, the motility, the morphology, the bacterial content, the sperm cell concentration, and report back whether or not those are matching expectations.
Mm-hmm. And just to touch on that, I've mentioned it to a few producers. The details matter; they really do.
Yeah, the details do matter, and one of the things that I find over and over again is that people assume because they have a piece of equipment that they have the answer, and I would just caution you that is often not the case. We through the quality assurance work we do, we see issues that come out of labs that have different types of equipment, all the way up to and including CASA systems, and we can even see differences between doses produced by different technicians using the same equipment on the same site. So it's not prudent to assume that just because you have a piece of equipment that you have the answer. You certainly need to expose that equipment in your process to an qualified external lab to independently verify whether or not you're getting what you want.
Yeah, definitely. Very good. And then I guess we have a question that just came in. Do we have any data available on using Ovu gel?
That's probably for me, unless you have something, Chris.
Available.
Yeah.
I didn't incorporate any into this, but yes, Ovu gel can be used as one of those single fixed time protocols that Dr. Kurt mentioned a moment ago, and that can work if there's a fairly rigorous process that needs to be built around that. So I guess it can work, but it has to be used the way it's designed to be used. There's no very limited ways to improvise with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Paul, I can see from our research if we've done anything specifically from ours. I know, like, I've seen some of the data from the suppliers, and there is some advantages on sort of tightening up your groups, right? So you have the similar wean age, etc. There can be advantages to that. But yeah, same as everything has to be managed well. But I'll look into that, and we can get back to you with that full answer.
Sure. Very good. Well, you know what? With that, I think, well, actually, we do have one more. This is for you, Dr. Kuster. What is the lag time for on-farm AI and natural service boars from arrival until when they can be used?
Okay. Yeah, the lag time I mentioned. So what I was referring to there was the time between when the boars would, say, be tested out of isolation, when the veterinarian or the quarantine, when the vet says that they could be used for breeding, and when the boar is actually ready for breeding. And so oftentimes the boars are delivered younger than when they're really prepared to be highly fertile sires. And so that lag time refers to the time that they're still maturing. And the amount of time that takes is going to depend on the age when the boar was delivered, the genotype or the genetic line of that boar. The purebreds tend to be a little slower than crossbreds or hybrid boars. And ultimately, it's the boar that tells you when he's ready, not necessarily the calendar. And so then we're right back to the breeding soundness exam or the ability to do either on-farm QC or send samples out to determine whether or not the semen quality of that boar is ready for use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Well, I think we've answered each of the questions, unless there's burning last minute ones that'll come in. But we should likely wrap up. Thank you very kindly, Dr. Kuster and Kurt, for, I guess, putting this all together and presenting to our producers. Thank you all Pig Channel viewers. We obviously wouldn't really have much purpose to present and whatnot today if you weren't watching, so thank you. And then, of course, we've got just one final time, thank you to Merck for sponsoring, and here we can see all of the other sponsors as well that we truly appreciate. If you have any questions, let us know, and we will certainly get back to you. And I guess with that, have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And we probably won't be hearing from you. Have a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Alrighty, take care.